Well, good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon, Father.
I apologize for being a little distant today, just out of caution, and I'm not 100%, so I'm trying to preserve my voice as well, getting my health back here to 100%. Today we begin 6 weeks of a series, Life is Messy, and we're going to go through this book that Matthew Kelly wrote last year. Matthew Kelly is a wonderful Catholic author of many books. Perhaps you've read some of his books in the past. And this particular book reveals something of Matthew's private life. It's very interesting in that regard. He says up front in the book that he's giving to us several years of his own private journals. And it's specifically about a very dark time in his life. So his wisdom and insight in this book will help us in this topic. Life is messy. You know what? None of us need any evidence of that, do we? We can probably all give a testimony of the messiness of our own lives. Your son comes home from school with a significant other you don't approve. Life is messy. Your husband lost his job, but it was 3 months ago, and he didn't tell you. Life is messy. Your friend suddenly stops talking to you because of a Facebook post or a social media post that you made 2 years ago. Life is messy. So, at the beginning of the book, Matthew talks about how we can't avoid the messiness of life. As much as we might try at times to avoid all the messiness, the best thing to do is to simply accept that life is messy. Why? Because we are messy. We are broken. But in that brokenness and in that messiness in our life, there is also beauty. Well, myself, I can give testimony just from the past few weeks. So I went on a wonderful, wonderful vacation, and I'll tell you more about it in the course of the next several weeks. Maybe I'll share with you some picture. It was to the Passion Play in Oberammergau, a little town in the southern part of Germany. And there's an irony to the fact that I went on this trip to this little town for the Passion Play. So this was planned 5 years ago, and you may not know about the story of this little town, Oberammergau. So back in 1634, the villagers in this town were suffering from the plague. And they made a vow to God. If they put on this Passion Play, all the townspeople, then God, please protect us from the plague. And so they put on the first play in 1634. God protected all the townspeople from the plague. And I'm just laughing. God, you must have a sense of humor, because at this very play that these townspeople have done every 10 years, pretty much nonstop for almost 400 years, I caught the 2022 plague. So I have to laugh or cry. I have to laugh that, God, you helped me to avoid this for 2.5 years, and then I got it, but cry that, the suffering from COVID. But thanks be to God, we're here. Life is messy. Oh, as I said, over the next 6 weeks, we're going to look at this topic and look at brief excerpts from Matthew's book. Now, caution. If you've started to read the book already, and I encourage you to pick up a copy, we have some copies you can get after Mass for free. The book itself is kind of messy, isn't it? There are no chapters. We don't find out exactly what happened to Matthew Kelly. That's one of the mysteries of reading this book. Something really, really traumatized him. He doesn't name what that something is. Perhaps it was a kind of betrayal. But he pours out these heart-wrenching lessons for us. Well, all appropriately for today, we're going to jump to page 29 and following of the book. If you would read along afterwards, I'm just going to quote a couple quotations from page 29 and following. And at first here, Matthew talks about the dark night of the soul. What's that? The dark night of the soul is a concept that is mentioned by St. John of the Cross, a Catholic priest and a mystic back in the 1500s. Well, here's what Matthew says about that. He says, the dark night of the soul annihilates anything you believe about yourself that is not true. Everything is stripped away except your essential self. Our old self is left behind, and your new self emerges. And when the darkness lifts, you have clarity like never before, because all that is left is the self you cannot live without, and a piercing sense of how to spend the rest of your life. So perhaps you've been through a period like this. This is not all that common. It's quite rare, actually, but it's a spiritual thing that we discover through this dark night who we are. So here's a question Matthew challenges us, and I'd like to look just at some brief questions for all of us to ponder together as we go through this series. Here's the first one. What are some things you believe about yourself that are not true? What are some things that you believe about yourself that are not true? Perhaps it's that you're not good enough. You're not up to the task. Perhaps it's that, I have a shady past. I'm therefore broken forever. I'm not worthy of God's love. Or perhaps it's that I'm too young, or I'm too old, or I can't possibly make a difference in the world, or a difference in people's lives. What are some of those things that are simply not true? And actually, the moments of the dark night can help us to reveal that. So how do we get further clarity? How do we get further clarity? Matthew goes on then, the very next section here, to quote about emptiness, the emptiness that we sometimes experience. He says, we all experience emptiness. We all have ways of dealing with it. I have dealt with emptiness throughout my life in a variety of ways. They have all been equally ineffective except one. I've tried to fill the void with work, with pleasure, with comfort, with things, with plans for the future. But none of these bring satisfaction because these things don't rightfully belong in the void. When I'm finished distracting myself with these things, the emptiness is still there. Learning to deal with our emptiness in a healthy way is one thing. Choosing to deal with emptiness in a healthy way requires self-awareness and courage. So this is where, my friends, Matthew's words of advice and wisdom go beyond any kind of self-help or any kind of self-improvement plan. And we've all experienced this. In this past week, I was quarantined for 4 days, pondering this and just trying to enter into prayer, but then getting distracted by TV and computer and Netflix and just, feeling a little sorry for myself as well. Well, Matthew's wisdom, where we find to be filled and to relieve that emptiness, is beyond anything that we do. So in the gospel for today, Jesus gives his disciples some instruction. And if you were with us last week, Jesus, in the previous scene, had just been with his friends, Martha and Mary. And if you were with us last week, Deacon Max preached so beautifully about Mary, the sister who sat at the feet of Jesus as he taught. She chose the better part. She played the role of a disciple of Jesus, the great rabbi, listening to him speak, receiving actively his love and wisdom, which we do, of course, in prayer. So Jesus says her part was the better part. And so it's no mistake that his disciples then ask him. They ask him this simple question. Lord, teach us how to pray. We sometimes get confused and we don't know how to pray, or we maybe even feel helpless at times, crying out in the void, in the darkness, in our emptiness. Lord, teach us how to talk with you. Well, Jesus then goes on in the gospel reading to teach them and to teach us the familiar words of the Our Father, his very words reminding us that God is intimately in love with us and is close to us. Even more importantly, Jesus reminds us that prayer is effective. Prayer is powerful, even if we don't feel it in the moment. Even if we don't feel that certain sense of presence, just giving God the space to work in us, to speak to us, is powerful. It works. So I can testify, certainly myself. As I said, I went on this trip to this little town in southern Germany to be part of an act of devotion that the townspeople did 400 years ago. And I sort of claim this as my German heritage as well, to be part of this. They pledged before God to be protected and to devote themselves. And the play is actually all the townspeople. It's quite amazing to see 1,500 people on stage, and they commit a whole chunk of their life every 10 years to put on this passion play. Well, I am alive, thanks be to God, and my heart is actually full. Even though I suffered and struggled with COVID right after the trip, my heart is full. From all the things that I experienced, that we experienced on the trip, I was with my mother, and those 2 weeks with her were such a blessing. We actually visited several cities in Central Europe, Prague, Budapest, Vienna, Salzburg, and just to see the beauty of Europe, Central Europe, and all these places filled my heart. And the churches we went into, the experience of God in these places, the mountains and the Alps, how beautiful it was. So my spirit is full. I can give testimony to that. The second question Matthew invites us to ponder today is this: how would your life be different if you tried asking God to fill your emptiness? Just imagine your life being different if you ask God on a regular basis to fill your spirit, to fill your heart with His life and love and prayer and His presence all around us. And the most important thing, the thing to take away today, my friends, is to not give up. In the messiness of life, to not give up. And that's exactly what Jesus reminds us today. He says, and I tell you, ask and you will receive. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks, the door will be open. Jesus' words challenge us to have a confidence that in the end, God is alive, God is real, our prayers are effective, and He will answer our prayers. So never, never give up. So my friends, this week, I just invite you to ponder a few things. Why is life so messy? One last quote from Matthew in the book, in the very same section. Matthew says, life should be lived with maximum intentionality, but too often we are conflicted and confused. When we act in these states, we usually cause pain and suffering to ourselves and others. Clarity is necessary to live with great intentionality. By finding that clarity is almost impossible in the midst of this crazy, noisy, busy world. That's why having time in silence and solitude each day is essential. Clarity and intentionality. So here's your homework for this week as we begin this next 6 weeks going through this book. Just ponder your life and ask yourself this question in your prayer. It's really 2 questions. In what areas of your life are you living with maximum intentionality? And in what areas are you searching for clarity? Be specific, asking God. And just notice, how you are doing what you want to do, that you're intentional, but what ways do you need to seek clarity? You see the key here, my friends, is that this could be the beginning. In the beginning, in the midst of the mess of life, of finding something better. Well, bottom line, life is messy. We all know that. Life is going to be messy, but life can be and is also beautiful. Amen.